He texted me happy birthday 3 days late, then blamed me for not reminding him. That was the last straw. By that afternoon, I froze his access to the family trust. By midnight, he'd called 47 times. That wasn't love, that was panic. And if you think that's extreme, just wait until you hear what came next. Because this wasn't about a birthday. It was about what happens when people forget who you are the moment they no longer need something from you. And trust me, after 5 years of silence, I finally found my voice and I used it. 3 months earlier, I was still what you might call a devoted mother, or more accurately, a doormat with a checkbook. At 68, I had quietly spent decades funding my son Michael's version of the American dream, without ever demanding much in return. When my husband Robert passed away 5 years ago, he left behind a comfortable estate. Not vast, but generous enough to take care of me for the rest of my life, and apparently take care of Michael, his wife Nora, and their 2 children too. I lived in the same Park Avenue apartment Robert and I had shared for 30 years. I liked routine. I liked quiet. I liked having my family around me, or at least the idea of it. Michael had a well-paying job, but they were living far above their means. I helped cover their mortgage on a Westchester home with too many bedrooms, their kids' private school tuition, and Nora's shopping addiction that seemed to require weekly packages from luxury brands I couldn't pronounce. And I never questioned it. Every Sunday, I drove to their house for dinner. Every holiday, I wrote another check. Every birthday or graduation, I handed out envelopes like a bank teller at closing time. I told myself it was love. I told myself I was doing what mothers do. But then came the silence. It wasn't sudden, it crept in slowly. Phone calls turned into texts. Texts turned into silence. Visits became transactional. Nora barely acknowledged me, too busy planning kitchen remodels and weekend spa trips. Michael would pop into the room, half distracted, say something about a work deadline, and disappear again. The kids were polite but disengaged, like I was just another adult they were expected to tolerate. Still, I kept coming. Still, I kept paying. Still, I kept hoping. Then came my birthday. The day before, I'd gone to the grocery store and bought ingredients for Michael's favorite chocolate cake. I made it every year since he was 5. I spent 2 hours in the kitchen with aching joints, determined to give him something meaningful, something that showed I still cared, even if I wasn't sure he did. That morning, I sent him a simple message. Cake's ready. Stop by whenever. No reply. Not that day. Not the next. Not the day after that. By the 3rd day, I stood in my kitchen staring at that uneaten cake, now stale and sunken in the middle, before scraping it into the trash with shaking hands. I hadn't cried in years, not since Robert's funeral, but standing there with frosting clinging to the sink and silence clinging to my heart, I let myself mourn, not for a birthday forgotten, but for the illusion I had clung to for far too long. The next morning, my phone finally buzzed, a text from Michael. Hey mom, happy birthday. Sorry it's a few days late. You should have reminded me. You should have reminded me. The audacity of that message landed like a slap. It rewrote the narrative I had clung to for years. This wasn't absent-mindedness. This wasn't forgetfulness. This was neglect disguised as entitlement. That text was the moment something inside me cracked open, and what leaked out wasn't sadness. It was clarity. I didn't reply, I didn't cry, I didn't even finish my coffee. Instead, I called our family lawyer, James Richardson. He'd managed Robert's estate for years. When he picked up, I said only this. I want to restructure the trust, immediately. James was surprised but didn't ask many questions. He'd helped set up the automatic monthly transfers that sent thousands of dollars to Michael's accounts each month. I told him to cancel every one. By that afternoon, the money stopped flowing. No announcement, no warning. I let the silence do the talking. And that silence didn't last long. Within 6 days, Michael was calling. Again. And again. 23 times in one evening, followed by Nora, then texts, then voicemails. The panic in their voices grew with each message. Mom, the mortgage bounced. Something's wrong with the bank. Dorothy, please, we need to talk. And finally, this isn't funny anymore. We need that money. That was the moment I understood. It was never about love. It was never about connection. It was about access. They didn't miss me. They missed the money. And for the first time in decades, I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel cruel. I felt free. The next morning at 7:30 a.m., someone pounded on my door like the building was on fire. It was Michael and Nora. They looked like they'd stepped straight out of a disaster movie, disheveled, angry, desperate. Michael stormed in the moment I opened the door. What's going on? The bank says the payments stopped, the mortgage bounced, the cars, everything's declined. I offered them coffee. They declined, of course. Then I calmly walked to the kitchen and started making it anyway. measured the grounds, poured the water, let them stew. And then I told them the truth. They stood there watching me, fuming in silence, as I placed 2 cups on the table with deliberate care. I wasn't stalling. I was reclaiming my space, my pace. After all, for the first time in years, I had nothing to lose and everything to say. I stirred in my cream and finally looked at them. I've been doing some thinking, I said calmly, about priorities, relationships, and what it means to be a family. Michael rolled his eyes slightly, but I caught it. Nora didn't even try to hide her irritation. Dorothy, she said sharply, this isn't the time for speeches. You've put us in a really difficult position. I smiled gently. No, dear. You put yourselves in a difficult position. I just stopped enabling it. Michael sat down heavily on the couch, his shoulders slumped. If this is about your birthday, I raised a hand. This is about every birthday, every holiday, every phone call that didn't come, every time I visited and was treated like an ATM in pearls. I looked at Nora, who had crossed her arms so tightly she looked like she might snap in half. It's about all the years I poured love and money into this family and got silence in return. You're overreacting, Nora said quickly, her voice tight. Families go through things. We've been busy. It doesn't mean we don't love you. I walked to my desk and retrieved a folder I'd prepared the day I called my lawyer. I opened it and laid the contents on the table in front of them. Do you want to talk about love? Let's talk about numbers. Michael looked down, confused. His eyes scanned the pages, spreadsheets, bank statements, summaries. What is this? In the 5 years since your father died, I said, I have given your household $847,000 in direct monthly support. That doesn't include gifts, tuition, holidays, or the down payment on your house. That's just the basics, the maintenance of your lifestyle. Nora went pale. Michael blinked at the papers, mouth open, unable to form words. I kept going. In return, I've received 32 visits, 14 family events where I was largely ignored, 7 phone calls checking on my health, and 43 requests for money. The silence between us was deafening. On average, I continued, each time you visited me, it cost me over $26,000. Each family event? $60,000. I've been paying to be tolerated. Michael rubbed his face, the weight of it all visibly sinking in. Mom, I didn't realize it was that much. That's the problem, I said, my voice suddenly sharp. You didn't realize because you didn't care. Not once did you ask if I could afford it. Not once did you wonder if I was lonely. You assumed the money would just keep flowing because I'm your mother, because that's what I'm for, right? Nora finally snapped. You can't just abandon us because your feelings got hurt. I turned to her slowly. Oh, I'm not abandoning anyone. I'm simply matching the energy I've been given. For years, I supported your entire life without judgment. But I've come to understand something very clearly. Generosity without gratitude is exploitation. Michael stood up and walked to the window, quiet for the first time in our entire exchange. What do you want us to do? He asked, not with anger, but with something almost resembling humility. I let the silence stretch for a few long seconds before I answered. I want you to prove that I matter to you beyond the money. I want 30 days, no handouts, no payments, no quick fixes, just 30 days of you showing me that I'm a person, not a paycheck. Nora looked like she might explode. You're making us perform for you? No, I said, finishing my coffee. I'm giving you the opportunity to earn back the trust you've spent years squandering. Michael turned to me slowly. And if we don't? I met his eyes without blinking. Then the trust fund becomes a scholarship in your father's name for women over 60 who want to start their lives over. The words landed like the thunderclap. Nora's face twisted, searching for some retort, but none came. Michael looked at the floor. You have 30 days, I repeated. Use them wisely. They left without saying another word. That night, for the first time in a long while, I didn't dream about Robert or family dinners or what-ifs. I dreamt of silence, of peace, of waking up to a day that belonged entirely to me. The next morning, a knock at my door surprised me. It was Emma, my granddaughter. She held a bouquet of slightly wilted flowers and a card with hand-drawn hearts. Hi, Grandma, she said softly. Can I come in? I stepped aside and smiled. Of course, darling. Emma sat at my kitchen table, legs swinging beneath the chair, her eyes flitting around the room like she was seeing it for the first time. It struck me just how unfamiliar she was with this space, my home. For all the Sundays and holidays I'd driven to Westchester, my grandchildren had rarely, if ever, been to Park Avenue. I'd always gone to them, always made myself convenient. Watching her now, nervously smoothing her skirt and glancing at the family photos on the wall, I realized how one-sided that effort had been. She handed me the card. Inside, written in colorful gel pen, were 3 simple words. I'm sorry, Grandma. I ran my fingers over the letters, swallowing the lump forming in my throat. Emma looked up. Dad told us you were mad, she said, but I wanted to come anyway. I like your apartment. It smells like cinnamon. I smiled. That's probably because I've been baking to keep busy. She perked up. You bake? I nodded. Your father's favorite was chocolate cake. I used to make it for him every birthday. Emma tilted her head. You mean the cake he always says is from the bakery? That made me chuckle, bittersweet. No, sweetheart, that was mine. We spent the afternoon together. She helped me sort old photographs, asked questions about her grandfather, and even offered to help bake cookies. I didn't bring up Michael or Nora. I didn't need to. Emma, in her own quiet way, was making an effort, an honest, uncoached attempt to reconnect. That evening, Michael called again. I let it go to voicemail. The message was different this time. No mention of money, just a tired voice saying, Emma told me she saw you. Thank you for letting her come. I'd like to talk, if you're willing. I wasn't ready yet. Not for him. But it was a start. The next few days passed with unexpected warmth. Jake, my grandson, came by with a book he thought I'd like. He sat awkwardly on the couch, not sure how to make conversation, but the gesture meant something. Then came a handwritten note from Michael, delivered with a bouquet of hydrangeas. No ask, no excuses, just an apology. He said he was reflecting, that he hadn't realized how far they'd drifted from what mattered, that he missed me. I wanted to believe it, I really did, but I'd learned to be cautious with hope. By the second week, Michael started calling regularly, not to ask for anything, but to talk. He told me about work struggles, how Nora was trying to freelance again to bring in some income. He even asked if I remembered how Dad used to calm him down before school exams. There was a softness in his voice I hadn't heard since he was in college. Nora, on the other hand, stayed silent until the third week. She showed up unannounced one afternoon, dressed far more simply than usual. No jewelry, no designer handbag, just her, holding a small plate with a slice of lemon cake. I remembered you said you liked this once, she said stiffly. I baked it. I arched a brow. You baked? She rolled her eyes. Well, I helped the kids bake it, but I did read the recipe out loud. I smiled despite myself and invited her in. We didn't talk about the money, not at first. We talked about how stressful life had been since the payments stopped, how they'd had to cancel their vacation, refinance one of the cars, and pull back on spending. She didn't complain, she explained. And somewhere in that conversation, she surprised me. I never said thank you, she said quietly. For the house, the schools, for everything. I just assumed you'd always have it, I offered. She nodded. I didn't marry Michael for the money, but once it was there, it just became normal, expected, and I forgot how hard it must have been to keep giving when no one gave back. It wasn't a perfect apology, but it was the first real one I'd heard from her. As the 30-day deadline approached, something else began to change. I was smiling more, sleeping better. I went for walks. I joined a bridge club. My world, which had shrunk to the size of my son's needs, was slowly expanding again, and the visits kept coming. By the final week, Emma and Jake came by with a small scrapbook they'd made. Pictures, drawings, notes from weekends, and memories they'd recreated from photos I'd shown them. In the back was a hand-drawn family tree, with me at the top. We thought you should be first, Emma said proudly, because none of us would be here without you. That one sentence did what no apology ever could. On the 30th day, Michael invited me to dinner, not in Westchester, but at a small Italian place near my apartment. He and Nora were already seated when I arrived, and they stood when I walked in. I noticed Nora had brought no purse, no flash, just herself. We talked, laughed a little. And when dessert came, Michael looked me in the eye. We've learned a lot this month, he said, about you, about ourselves. I don't expect things to go back to the way they were, but I do hope we can move forward, better this time. Together. I nodded slowly. That depends on you. I didn't restore the payments that night. In fact, I didn't mention the trust fund at all. I wanted to see what they would do without a carrot dangling in front of them. Whether their newfound concern would vanish the moment they realized I wasn't rushing to reopen the vault. But something surprising happened. They kept coming. Not just the kids, but Michael too. He called to share good news, little anecdotes, even asked my opinion on a business proposal he was working on. Emma and Jake came over nearly every Saturday, each time more comfortable, more like real grandchildren and less like distant acquaintances. We baked, we talked, we even watched old home videos that made them laugh to see their father in 90s denim overalls. One Sunday afternoon, a few weeks after that dinner, I was sitting on my balcony with a cup of tea when Michael showed up again, this time alone. No dramatics, no pleading, just a quiet knock and a hesitant smile. I've been thinking, he began after I let him in, about everything, and I realized I never asked how you managed after Dad died. I just assumed you were fine. I studied his face. It was older now, tired in ways he couldn't hide. Why would you assume that? Because I didn't want to believe you might need us, he admitted. Because if I'd thought about it, really thought about it, I'd have had to admit I was too wrapped up in myself to care. He sat beside me, and for the first time in years, it felt like I had my son back. The one I raised, not the one I'd been bankrolling. You've always been there, he said quietly. And I think that made me lazy, spoiled even. But I see it now, and I want to be better. I want us to be better. I nodded slowly. It's not just about remembering birthdays, Michael. It's about remembering people. I know, he said. I just hope it's not too late. The words hung between us. I let them settle before answering. It's not too late, but that trust you're talking about, it isn't just financial, and it doesn't get rebuilt with one apology or a few visits. He nodded. I get that. I sipped my tea, letting the breeze carry away years of silent resentment. You know, I said after a pause, when your father passed, I thought I'd never feel secure again. Not emotionally, not financially. But over time, I realized the money wasn't the security. The relationships were. And when those frayed, the money became meaningless. Michael looked down, fiddling with his wedding ring. I want to fix that. I believe you do, I said. But it's going to take consistency. It's going to take honesty. And it's going to take a whole lot more than a few weeks of good behavior. We sat in silence for a while after that, the kind of silence that isn't uncomfortable, just full. The next morning, I called James, my lawyer. I think it's time we revisit the trust, I said. Shall we reinstate the monthly transfers? No, I said firmly. Not like before. No, not before. I asked him to restructure everything. No more automatic payments, no more blank checks. Instead, I wanted a family endowment plan, education funds for the grandchildren, a contribution match program if Michael or Nora decided to work, and a charitable donation fund that the entire family would manage together. If they wanted access to the money, the fund, they'd have to earn it through purpose, effort, and involvement. No more handouts, only shared responsibilities. A week later, I invited them all to lunch to explain the changes, not as punishment, but as an evolution. I want this family to grow stronger, I told them, and that won't happen if we continue down the path we were on. Nora looked hesitant at first, but she surprised me by speaking up. I think this is fair, she said. Honestly, this is probably overdue. Michael agreed. The kids just looked confused, but I smiled at them and said, don't worry, you'll understand when you are older and hopefully appreciate it too. From that point on, things began to change, not perfectly, not all at once, but gradually in small ways that mattered. Michael started volunteering at the kids' school. Nora took a part-time consulting gig and began teaching Emma to budget her allowance. They asked me to dinner more often, not just out of guilt, but because they wanted to spend time with me. And slowly I began to trust them again, not just with the money, but with my heart. The final piece came a few months later when I was invited to Jake's school project presentation. He'd chosen to do a biography on a family member who'd inspired him. When he stood up in front of the class, he said, I chose my grandma because she's the strongest person I know. And she taught me that love isn't just about giving, it's about showing up. My eyes welled up. That was all I needed. It took losing something to make them realize what they had. And it took standing up for myself after decades of shrinking to finally feel seen. To anyone watching this, let me say this. Love doesn't mean sacrificing your self-worth. Family doesn't mean accepting disrespect in the name of loyalty. And giving should never come at the cost of your dignity. Set boundaries. Demand reciprocity. Teach your children to see you, not just what you can give them. Because one day, they'll either be grateful you did or wish they'd learned sooner. If this story meant something to you, give it a thumbs up, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more stories that speak truth with heart. I'd love to know, what would you have done in my shoes? Drop a comment below. I never thought the people I loved most would someday treat me like a vending machine. A silent, mechanical fixture they approached only when they needed something. But after 5 years of funding their lifestyle with little more than a tired, "Thanks, Mom," I finally reached my breaking point. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing dramatic. Just a quiet realization while pouring myself a glass of wine that I wasn't living, I was being used, and I was done. My name is Dorothy, and I'm 71 years old. Widowed 5 years ago, mother to one son, Michael, and grandmother to two lovely, if increasingly distant children, Emma and Jake. When my husband Robert passed, he left me with more than grief. He left behind an estate worth over $50 million, along with a trust fund that allowed me to live comfortably and help my family generously. At first, it felt right. Michael was grieving too. Nora, his wife, was overwhelmed with the kids, so I stepped in. I paid off their mortgage, covered private school tuition, bought them new cars, even paid for family vacations. I told myself I was supporting them through a rough time, but the rough time never ended. The requests kept coming, bigger, bolder, more entitled, and slowly something began to rot between us. The gratitude disappeared. Michael stopped calling except when he needed something. Nora barely spoke to me at all, unless it was a passive aggressive complaint about the kids or how hard life was. Emma and Jake grew up not knowing me as anything but the woman who brought gifts and paid the bills. I became invisible unless I was useful. The final straw came when they forgot my birthday. Not a card, not a call, not even a text. That evening, I sat alone with a small cake I'd bought for myself, and I decided something had to change. I invited Michael and Nora over for dinner the next night. They showed up curious, maybe even a little nervous, especially when I poured the wine and sat down with a folder in front of me. I didn't drag it out. I told them calmly and clearly that I was pausing all financial support for 30 days. No more tuition payments, no more credit card bailouts, no more monthly deposits. For the first time in years, their eyes widened not with entitlement, but fear. I explained what I expected during those 30 days. Not grand gestures, not bribery, just basic decency. Treat me like family. Remember important dates. Ask about my life without being prompted. Include me in conversations. Show genuine respect for the woman who had funded their luxury for half a decade. Michael looked stunned but hopeful. We can do that, Mom. Absolutely. But I held up a finger. If I detect even the slightest hint of manipulation, the offer is permanently withdrawn. Nora's carefully curated composure cracked. What are we supposed to do in the meantime? We have mortgage payments, car payments, tuition. I smiled politely. You'll figure it out, like millions of other families do. Michael has a decent salary. You could get a job or downsize the house, sell one of the cars, live within your means. The word job seemed to strike Nora like a physical blow. She had married Michael straight out of college and never worked a day in her life. You're being incredibly cruel, she whispered. Or, I said, standing. I'm finally being honest about what this relationship has become. 30 days, starting now. They left without another word, Nora trembling with indignation, Michael looking genuinely lost. That night, I poured my wine and settled into my chair, already curious how far they'd go. The next morning, the phone rang. Michael. His voice was sweetened with artificial concern. Just calling to see how you're feeling today, Mom. We never ask enough about your health. I nearly laughed. In 5 years, he'd never once called to ask how I was unless it was small talk before asking for money. I'm fine, Michael. How thoughtful of you to ask. He kept up the act, suggesting we have lunch like old times, though I couldn't recall a single instance where we'd done that before. I played along, curious how far they'd take this performance. Less than an hour later, my 14-year-old granddaughter Emma called. She'd never voluntarily called me before in her life. Her voice was sweet but stiff, like she was reading from a script. She told me about her day, her classes, her teachers. Everything was amazing and so fun. When she finished, I gently asked her if she actually wanted to talk or if she was doing it because her parents told her to. After a pause, she admitted it was the latter. Dad said you were mad, that maybe you wouldn't be our grandma anymore if we didn't try harder. That broke my heart, not because she lied, but because she'd been used as a pawn in a game she didn't understand. Emma, I'll always be your grandmother. That won't ever change, okay? She giggled in relief. Okay, can I go? I have homework. Of course, I love you. I love you too, Grandma. The manipulation had officially begun. By day 5, the gestures became bolder. A massive bouquet of white roses and lilies arrived at my front door with a card that read, Thinking of you always. Love, Michael and Nora. Beautiful, dramatic, and completely out of character. Not once had they ever sent flowers for a birthday, Mother's Day, or even after Robert's funeral. But now when the money stopped, they remembered how to be thoughtful. I set the bouquet on the dining table, a centerpiece to the performance they were staging. An hour later, Nora called, her voice dripping with artificial cheer. Did you get our little surprise? They're lovely, I replied, matching her tone. I just wanted you to know how much we appreciate everything you've done for us over the years. I know I haven't always been the best daughter-in-law. The best daughter-in-law. This was the same woman who hadn't shared a genuine conversation with me in over 2 years, unless it involved veiled insults or complaints. Now, suddenly, she wanted to go shopping together and get our nails done. A girl's day. I'll think about it, I said coolly. By day 8, I received a handwritten letter from Jake, my 12-year-old grandson. Normally, I couldn't decipher a word of his messy handwriting, but this note was neat. Too neat. Clearly rehearsed, rewritten, probably dictated. Dear Grandma Dorothy, it began. I have been thinking about how awesome you are and how I don't tell you enough. You are the best grandma in the world, and I love you so much. I hope we can hang out more and do fun things together. Sweet? Yes. Genuine? No. Jake had never once said awesome in my presence, and he certainly hadn't expressed any desire to hang out with me in years. That evening, I called Michael. The letter from Jake was very touching. Oh, that was all his idea, he insisted. He's been feeling bad about not being closer to you. I cut him off. Stop lying to me. A beat of silence followed. If you want to rebuild our relationship, I said, my voice sharp with frustration, then it needs to be based on honesty, not manipulation, not rehearsed calls and letters from children who don't understand what's going on. If this is just about money, you've already failed. I hung up, exhausted. I'd hoped they might rise to the occasion, that they'd rediscover something real beneath the layers of dependence and entitlement. But it was clear they were just switching tactics, not changing behavior. They hadn't learned a thing. I had given them 30 days, and they were spending every one of them perfecting the act. Then came the conversation that changed everything. 2 weeks into this charade, I met my friend Margaret for lunch at our usual cafe. As we caught up over tea and scones, she casually mentioned seeing Nora at the country club. She was telling the girls about your mental decline, Margaret said, tone light but eyes concerned. I froze. What? She said you'd been acting erratic, making impulsive financial decisions, that Michael was looking into having you evaluated, out of concern. The teacup shook slightly in my hand. She made it sound so reasonable, Margaret continued. Several women nodded along. They were sympathetic. I drove home in a daze and called James Richardson, our family lawyer. James, I need a straight answer. Has Michael contacted you about my mental state? There was a pause. Dorothy, I probably shouldn't tell you this, but yes, he called last week, asked what the process was to have you evaluated for competency. And what did you say? I told him it would be a waste of time, that you're sharp as ever. But Dorothy, the fact that he asked it all. I ended the call and sat staring at the flowers still sitting on my table, now wilted at the edges. The letters, the phone calls, the rehearsed conversations. They weren't trying to win me back, they were building a case, laying the groundwork to paint me as unstable, irrational. The loving, concerned family dealing with a difficult elderly woman who'd suddenly cut them off without reason. They were planning something much darker than I'd imagined. I wasn't hurt anymore, I was furious. If they wanted a war, they'd just declared it. And they'd forgotten that I spent 40 years managing Robert's business finances, that I'd negotiated deals with billionaires and buried men twice as ruthless as Michael could ever dream of being. I wasn't some frail old woman. I was a strategist. And now, I had nothing left to lose. That weekend, I planned carefully. By Monday morning, I was ready. Step 1. I scheduled a complete psychological evaluation with the most respected neuropsychologist in Manhattan. When the report came back clean, I made sure James received a copy. Step 2, I called Michael. I've been thinking, I told him. You were right, I miss our family. Let's have dinner this Friday, all of us. I want to talk about how we can move forward. He nearly choked with relief. Mom, that's wonderful. Nora will be so glad. I bet she would. After hanging up with Michael, I made the next crucial call. To Patricia Chen, a seasoned private investigator James had recommended years ago when Robert had business partner issues. She was discreet, thorough, and had no patience for theatrics, which made her exactly what I needed. I told her I wanted everything: bank accounts, debts, assets, attorney visits, and especially anything that smelled like long-term planning on my behalf. 3 days later, Patricia delivered a file that made my blood run cold. Michael and Nora were in financial quicksand. Beyond the mortgage and the 2 luxury vehicles I'd helped them lease, they were drowning in credit card debt. Nora had been spending tens of thousands on clothes, spa treatments, and overpriced nonsense. They had refinanced the house I bought for them, twice, and had taken out a private loan just to cover Jake's tuition. Even worse, Patricia found a separate bank account I didn't recognize. It had been used for the past 2 years as a shell. Money in, money out, almost all from the funds I had gifted them monthly. But that wasn't the worst of it. She'd uncovered legal documents from a financial planning firm, plans that showed Michael and Nora had been consulting an attorney about establishing guardianship over me. Not recently, since Robert's death. The same week I gave them nearly $500,000 as a grief-induced gesture of goodwill, they had started building the case. Emotional instability, financial irresponsibility, isolation. They'd been plotting this for 5 years. I felt sick, All those forced family moments, the gradual erosion of warmth, the growing dependency, they hadn't just been lazy, they had been tactical. Everything I'd taken for emotional immaturity had actually been preparation. They wanted full legal control over my estate, $47 million, dollars, and if I hadn't stopped the financial support when I did, I likely would have signed my freedom away without even realizing it. Friday dinner became the final piece of my plan. I arrived precisely at 6 p.m. Michael greeted me at the door with a big, nervous smile. Nora, dressed like a hostess for a daytime TV show, ushered me in with carefully practiced warmth. The dining room table was immaculate: candles, fine china, cloth napkins. They even had soft jazz playing in the background. Emma and Jake were there too, visibly confused but happy to see me. For their sake alone, I kept my face calm and my tone pleasant. "Mom, you look stunning tonight," Nora said, gesturing to my black dress. "Thank you, dear. This was what I wore to Robert's funeral. You complimented it back then, too." She blinked, unsure how to respond. Michael raised his wine glass. "To family, to forgiveness, and to Mom for being the most generous, loving woman we know." The children echoed the sentiment, and for a brief moment, I saw something genuine in Emma's face. She didn't understand the politics. She just wanted peace. Dinner was surprisingly tolerable. They asked about my hobbies, laughed at my stories, fawned over my jewelry. For the first time in years, they treated me like someone whose presence mattered. It was almost enough to make me question my resolve. Almost. After dessert, I stood. "I have something I want to say," I began. Both of them leaned forward, expecting a speech of forgiveness, maybe even a reinstatement of the old financial arrangement. "These past 2 weeks have shown me a lot. Your calls, your letters, your concern for my health. It's made me realize how important it is to be part of each other's lives again." Michael smiled. Nora's hand slid toward her wine glass, her grip tightening slightly. "Which is why I've decided to be more involved moving forward. I met with James Richardson to review the trust documents." Their smiles froze. "I also completed a full mental evaluation. Passed with flying colors. James has the documentation in case there's any confusion." Nora stiffened in her chair. Michael blinked too fast. "And just to be thorough," I said, opening my purse and placing Patricia's report on the table, "I hired a private investigator. Very thorough woman, dug up everything." Michael's face lost all color. Nora reached for her napkin, as if the linen could shield her from what was coming. "I know about the guardianship plans, the financial shell accounts, the debt, the attorney meetings. I know everything." "Mom, it's not what you think," Michael croaked. "No?" I asked gently. "Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like a 5-year con designed to paint me as unstable and transfer control of my assets to you. That's not love, Michael. That's fraud." Jake looked horrified. Emma's fork clattered to the floor. "You were going to steal my life, my autonomy, everything your father and I worked for. And you almost succeeded." I gave them one final look at the people I had loved, protected, supported. People who had decided my value ended with my bank balance. "You have until the end of the month to move out. The house is mine. You're both perfectly capable of finding jobs and living within your means. If you ever contact me again, I will press charges." Michael opened his mouth. I raised my hand. "And just so we're clear, I'm changing my will. Every cent, $47 million, now goes to charity. Congratulations, Michael. Your greed cost you everything." The drive home was quiet, the kind of silence that didn't scream or demand attention, but offered peace. The kind that comes only after years of noise. I didn't cry, I didn't rage, I felt calm. Not because I'd won anything, but because I'd finally stopped losing myself in their game. For so long, I had allowed my role in the family to be defined by money. The provider, the fixer, the ATM. And in the absence of genuine affection, I let that role mask a deeper, more painful truth. I was being used, not just taken for granted, deliberately, calculatedly used. But now the performance was over. The audience had left. And I was free. The next morning, Patricia sent over additional documents she'd unearthed. One of them was a signed draft of a petition that Michael and Nora had been preparing for the court. It described me as erratic, easily confused, and socially withdrawn. It painted a portrait of a woman unraveling under the weight of grief and age. They'd even attached fabricated stories of me forgetting appointments, donating large sums to unverified charities, and isolating herself from friends and family. It was devastating. They hadn't just wanted my money, they wanted control of me, the right to decide where I lived, how I spent, what I was allowed to do. Like I was a fragile creature, incapable of living without them. The irony, of course, was that they were the ones who couldn't survive without me. Over the next few weeks, the fallout was both quiet and profound. Michael and Nora moved out of the house before the deadline, without contest. James handled the legal transition swiftly. I signed the updated will, diverting my entire estate to several organizations: medical research, education for underprivileged children, domestic violence support. Causes that meant something. Causes that wouldn't smile in my face while plotting behind my back. Emma and Jake stayed in touch. At first, it was tentative. Jake sent a text, just a meme, probably testing the waters. Emma called one afternoon while walking home from school. "Just wanted to hear your voice," she said. No script, no reason. I almost cried. We began to rebuild slowly and quietly. I picked Jake up from school once a week and we got milkshakes. Emma and I started having movie nights over FaceTime. She recommended teen dramas I barely understood. I countered with old Hitchcock thrillers she pretended to enjoy. We were getting to know each other, finally, not as symbols in a family war, but as people. Michael tried calling once. I let it go to voicemail. He didn't leave a message. Nora never called. At Margaret's urging, I joined a book club, not for the books, but for the noise, the laughter, the messy human energy of women who had stories to share and no hidden agendas. I found joy in small things: picking out flowers at the market, organizing Robert's old records, learning to make a sourdough starter that was more temperamental than a toddler. For so long, I had poured everything into keeping a family afloat that didn't love me back. Now, I was finally pouring into myself. The hardest part was accepting that my son, the boy I raised, the man I had believed would always have my back, had chosen to betray me. Not out of desperation, but out of entitlement. He believed he was owed everything, simply for existing. That the woman who gave him life owed him her fortune, her freedom, her future. But here's what I learned: love without respect is just control. An obligation without appreciation is just servitude. Families can be cruel, not with fists or words, but with silence, expectation, and calculated smiles. I used to think boundaries were cold. Now I know they're the warmest form of self-love. People will call me harsh for cutting them off, ruthless maybe. But they don't know the years I spent sacrificing. They don't know the birthdays forgotten, the medical scares ignored, the phone calls returned only when a check was late. They don't know the lonely holidays, the strained smiles, the quiet moments when I ask myself, is this what motherhood is supposed to feel like? The truth is, sometimes love has to come with a lock, a door you shut to keep your sanity safe inside. And walking away isn't giving up, it's choosing yourself when no one else will. So to anyone out there who feels like they're only loved for what they give, know this: your value isn't measured in money, meals, or martyrdom. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you provide, and it's never too late to choose peace over performance. Thanks for spending time with me. If this story moved you, share it, subscribe for more real life lessons, and leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts or stories. Your voice matters.